Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Everybody, welcome to Nightlight. So glad you could join me. This is going to be an exciting show, especially for me, because we're talking about something that everybody should know about, and very few do. I have Mark Gaffney with me, and he's written a book called Deep History and the Ages of Man, and it has some information in it that we all should have been taught in the school and weren't. And it's important that you understand this because it changes your outlook on the earth and our place on it. I'm going to give you a little bit from the cover of the book. Did human civilization begin 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, as we're told, with Sumer and Egypt? Or is there more to the story? What was the actual purpose of Stonehenge? And why is the Great Pyramid aligned to true north? Is it possible that advanced civilizations predated the modern era by tens of thousands of years? Hear that, tens of thousands of years. If so, what happened to them? Today, academia and Egyptology remain hamstrung by limiting beliefs, false assumptions, and shallow readings of ancient texts. Mark Gaffney, his book, represents compelling new evidence to support Charles Hapgood's theory of crustal displacement, first introduced in the 1950s. Deep History and the Ages of Man introduces a new and exciting Earth climate model that will challenge everything you thought you knew about ancient history, and about global warming, and about what's going on with us, and it just blows away just everything that the history books are teaching these days. And it's really important that you listen to this material and buy the book, because it's a fascinating read, and it gives you so much more than we're going to be able to do tonight, but it's so worth reading. So welcome to the show, Mark.
I'm very happy to be with you, Barbara. My pleasure.
I'm delighted to have you here. And, you know, in reading your book, I recognized Darwin, and I knew about, his Voyage of the Beagle and some of what he did, but I have to admit that the name of Charles Hapgood is not one that I have run into very often. You want to explain a little bit about what he is and what his theory, which I believe is no longer a theory, is?
Right. Well, he was a visionary, and he had worked during World War II. He was part of the Office of Strategic Services that later became the CIA. After the war, he taught classes, I think, at a community college in New Hampshire, or maybe it was northern Massachusetts, I'm not sure which, Springfield College there. And he, for many years, taught about the history of science. And he got his students interested in some of his own ideas. One of them was this crustal displacement issue. And they were also exploring the Piri Reis maps, some of these ancient maps. And I think Hapgood did some very important work in a number of areas, and that was another book he did. we might not get into talking about that tonight, but it also is, pertinent to the issue of crustal displacement, which was his main contribution. And he did 2 books on this. The first one in 1958, Earth Shifting Crust, and he had been collaborating with Albert Einstein on this theory, and call it a hypothesis at that point. And Einstein was just intrigued, and the first time he heard about this and read some of Hapgood's letters on this, he was excited. He became very excited because it was so simple, so clear, and, it made so much sense to Einstein. And then, go ahead.
No, it does make sense. That's what blows me away. It makes such great sense. Yeah. And it's supported by so many different methods. I don't understand why it's not taught.
In his time, Hapgood did not have the internet. He did not have Google Earth Pro and these really high-powered mapping software programs we have now. And so we've been able to find out a lot more. In his second book, he continued to learn, and he did a second book in 1970, and his ideas changed so much, they evolved so far that he decided to change the title. Instead of a second edition, he had a new title, which was The Path of the Pole. And he gave up on, one of his ideas that the ice buildup at the poles might create such enough mass that it could actually cause the Earth to tip, and all this mass would through centrifugal force would shift the outer crust toward the equator, but there was not enough ice buildup to explain that, so he gave up on that idea, but he continued. He never gave up on the idea of crustal displacement because the evidence just continued to build up.
Well,
and that's what I present in my book. I present new evidence in my book.
Oh, your evidence, I don't see how anybody can argue with it. Now, I've read in lots of places that the poles wobble, but the actual fact that they shift makes so much greater sense. And one of the burning questions I have, and there's probably no answer to it, but you have identified 5 different locations of where the poles have been over about 120,000 years. And I'm wondering, do we wait for a comet to hit us to create a shift, or is there something else that can create one of these massive shifts? And the other part of it is, does the shift take place all at once, or is it something that happens slowly?
Well, these are interesting questions. Let me tackle that last question first. Hapgood thought initially that this process of displacement of the crust would be a slow process. It could take place over many years. However, as his thinking evolved, he became less certain of that and was actually unclear about that later on in his 1970 book. And I believe that we feel today, I feel, and I believe Jim McCanney also feels, he's a scientist that I collaborated with for part of this book, that this process actually takes place in a catastrophic manner within like 24 hours, 1 to 2 days.
Wow.
Yeah, so it is a cataclysm when it happens.
Okay, and I think people have to understand when one of these shifts takes place, it moves areas depending on where the hit has been taken, up to 1,000 miles.
Well, let me clarify that. I agree with McCanney. There are a couple of other mechanisms people have proposed for how this happens and what causes it. But I don't think there's any force within the Earth capable of doing this, and I think it requires a force from outside the Earth, like a passing comet. And I don't mean an impact. I don't think these events are caused by impacts. but probably by a close encounter. Now, those are much more common than impacts. So it wouldn't take a comet impact. It would take a planet-sized comet coming fairly close to the Earth within, I don't know, maybe within 1 million miles perhaps, or less. Perhaps 500,000 miles, something like that. We don't really know, but because we haven't, this has not happened in recorded history. So we are piecing this together, based on evidence from the distant past, which is not always, obvious. It's not always clear. So as we go back in time, the evidence gets more and more confused, So because events happen that cover up, other events, and so things get concealed and altered. So, we're piecing this together.
Well, I mean, I understand that, and the fact that you're going back 120, 130,000 years. It just, to me, the Earth is so old. This kind of a repetition of sorts must have happened before, but like you said, the way you are verifying the last 5 shifts are with elements that we can touch, that we can see, that we can validate now, with the mollusk beds, the layers of bones in some of the caves in Britain, and what was the third? The way that the spiritual temples and things were directed at true north. When you got all of the measurements, there were so many of them that were not true north. They were in different places where the different pole shifts had been. So you kind of were able to give a time frame as to when they were built, or an estimate, so to speak. Because I've always been bothered by the fact that people have said everything happened in the last 6,000 years, which doesn't make sense to me. So you cover that. You stretch it out.
That makes no sense. Right. Well, let me talk about the timeline, because you brought that up. I think this discovery of the bone caves in England has been a major contributing factor here to helping us understand the timeline. Now, I want to give credit here first, though, to Mark Carlotto. He's another researcher, and he's been on your show, you said, several times.
Oh, yeah.
We're like working in a very similar area, and we, kind of gone back and forth and bounced ideas back and forth. But Carlotto was ahead of me using the Google Earth Pro to make these, to determine the archaeological alignments of these pyramids and temples and so on. He has a database now of around 500 archaeological sites, many of which are aligned to one or another of these 4 previous North Pole positions. So we know about 5 pole positions, including the current pole, 4 other ones that happened earlier. And we have archaeological alignments pointing to these pole positions with incredible accuracy in some cases. I mean, just spot on in some cases. Now, some of them are less accurate, but when they're on, I mean, they are on, and it's astounding, really. And so we have that's how he identified the locations. But what is really interesting is that my contribution, I think, has been recognizing the importance of the fossils found in these caves in England, and we got over 20 of them. I call them the bone caves of England. And the first one that was discovered was around 1822, and research started at that time and has continued ever since. So we have over 200 years of research now in these bone caves. And there was a key paper a summary paper published in 2001 that I discuss in my book, and in fact, it's so important. I regard it as so important that I got permission I acquired the rights to reprint that paper as an appendix to my book so the readers can get the benefit of it. Because these authors, there was two guys that did this paper, they had identified 5 stratigraphic layers. They went through, they sifted through all the research done over those 200 years and boiled it down, and they identified 5 stratigraphic layers. And I'll tell you what, I was just blown away when I realized that each one of those stratigraphic layers correlates with one of the pole positions. So we have 5 stratigraphic layers and 5 pole positions, and they correlate like a hand in a glove. So what we have here is a holographic record in the bone caves of England, dating back to maybe 130,000 years ago. And it's amazing. It's really mind-boggling the way this lines up. It just lines up beautifully.
With the different layers, I mean, they're going into a cave and they're digging stuff up, layer by layer by layer by layer. How do they determine where one layer stops and the other layer starts?
Okay, I have to tell you, I'm not a paleontologist and I'm not an archaeologist, so I don't have personal experience doing this, but it took them a long time to figure this out, where one stopped and another began. There was a lot of comparative work, back and forth with the different caves. Yeah. And some of the caves had like all the layers maybe. Other caves only had 1 or 2 of the layers. So they had to piece this together. And the deepest layer dates back to 125 to 130,000 years ago. And in that deepest layer, they found fossils of these hippopotamus, that were living in England at that time, flourishing in the Thames River and in sites all the way up to central England. I think the most northerly one was that cave. What was the name of that cave? I have to check let me check the contents here. Yorkshire, yeah. There was a cave in Yorkshire in central England where that was the first discovery made. And these hippos, require, and this is the mind-boggling thing, the hippos require subtropical conditions.
Yeah. Well,
and so we have all these other animals also at that time that were in that required a subtropical ecosystem.
I think one thing that people don't actually remember to take into consideration is that these different time frames, the level of the oceans was higher or lower, so that there were land bridges, so that if you wanted to walk, you could probably walk all over the place, and there weren't the oceans and the lakes that there are today. And I think that's one of the things that blew me away, because you had graphics of where the water lines basically were, and it's something I hadn't taken into consideration, that the reason that we don't have a lot of records or ways of proving stuff is because a lot of the stuff is now underwater.
That's right, and I'm sure there are a lot of, in fact, I suspect that there are archaeological sites underwater that could be aligned with pole positions that even predate the ones we know about. There may have been earlier ones.
I would love
so this
that.
Is one of the reasons why it's so exciting that people get out there and do that, visit these areas that have not been studied.
Well, I think one of the things, the different animals that were found in different places, had to mean that this was in a more tropical or a better climate than it is today. And with the poles, they go from, I don't know, from Arctic to Hudson Bay to the Norway, and then Greenland, and then the Bering Sea, and so that's a lot of land or water to cover. Those are big shifts in where the equator was, and where where all of us kind of were, so that it makes a big difference in in how humanity dealt with it, how they lived through it, or because of it, or migrated further south. It feels like South America, has that ever been in a polar region?
Good question. I think we have on record some of these crustal displacements have been more than 2,000 miles.
Yeah.
That's a lot of degrees of latitude. So let's talk about the one in the Bering Sea. You mentioned the Bering Sea. Now that lines up with positions, archaeological sites in Peru that Carlotto identified. Also, there are sites in Greece, the Tomb of Agamemnon, and also one at Petra, the Temple of the Winged Lions there, that all line up spot on with this pole position in the Bering Sea. Now, it turns out that this is the deepest layer of the bone caves.
Yeah.
So this is the time when there were hippos in England, and we can determine what the latitude would have been of England with this incredible Google Earth Pro software program we have now. So all you do is we go to that pole position in the Bering Sea, and we calculate what the latitude would have been for England in Yorkshire or in along the Thames River, and it would have been at 20 to 25 degrees latitude, which would put it in the subtropical region where North Africa is. So we're getting, the data all fits together very, very beautifully, and we have fossils from that layer that have been isotopically dated using the uranium method that date those hippo bones to 121,000 years ago. So there you go.
Wow.
I mean, this is the beauty of this system, this method. These bone caves give us a way to date these pole positions. And we have similar dates. We have other dates that have been calculated for other fossils that were found and recovered from the other layers. So it all fits together, and the sequence is beautiful. So it works.
Oh yeah, no doubt about that. But there were other methods, that have been used to date, and I think this is what ties it all up for me. That you have the bones, and then you have the ice core samples, which fascinate me.
Right.
The ice cores samples do give you a change of seasons and a change of it shows that it was either much warmer or much colder, and that goes back thousands of years. And then the first one that you talked about that so impressed me were the mollusk shells. Right.
Because mollusks are very temperature sensitive, and they have to have a very specific temperature to live. And they are able to spread, they can ride the currents when they're in the larval stage. So they can move around from one place to another if the environment changes, they can move to their preferred habitat niche. And this is the evidence that I found that no one had noticed. It's right there in black and white, published by Charles Darwin in his book about the geology of South America, and I think it was published in 1846 or so. And he had a whole data set there of mollusk shells that were found along the coast of South America, indicating that the species had once lived down along the coast of Chile, but they had relocated up to the Peru region around the equator. And these were species that required a temperature, and the waters off Chile at that time were cold. They needed warmer water, and so why were they at one time found off the coast of Chile, along the coast of Chile there? Because evidently the waters had one time been much, much warmer. How do you explain that? Well, the change is about 2,000 miles, and the only way you can explain it is the crust of the Earth moved. And I think that Darwin came right up against this, but he just couldn't quite make the leap, you know. It was just a little too far. He was kind of locked into his own scientific assumptions, could not make a leap that the crust of the Earth could have moved that far like that.
Consider the time. I mean, archaeologists, you know, during that time wouldn't have swallowed it. But not for a minute. He would have been, he would have been kind of drummed out of the course, so to speak, I would think.
Well, we must remember that George Cuvier was a catastrophist, and that was really it was widely believed at that time that these cataclysms had occurred before and explained the Great Flood and so on. And his student there, Alcide de Bigny, I can't pronounce the French name, but he had preceded Darwin to South America and had been working there along the coast and with another collector, and they had gathered some of this data. I believe they passed it to Darwin. Darwin didn't gather this data himself, but he published the data because he was impressed with it. But he couldn't explain it, you know. And so Darwin was under the influence of Lyell, who was a uniformitarian, you know, who believed that changes happen very slowly, gradually.
Yeah. Well, if something happened, I mean, there were there were animals that were discovered that, you know, had flowers in their mouths. So, I know at one point it was a woolly mammoth, I think, that they found that the internal organs were warm enough to, even if it was frozen, for them to keep everything alive in the stomach for a couple of weeks, I think.
Well, you're right. You're talking about the mammoths that were flash frozen up in northern Siberia.
Yeah.
And we know they were flash frozen because the food, the petals, the flowers that the mammoths had eaten that were in their mouths and in their stomach would have decomposed, and they would have rotted if it had been a gradual freezing, you know, simply through like a storm or a sudden turn of the weather. It was more than that. It had to be much more than that because these animals are huge. I mean, these mammoths were larger than elephants. You know, some of the different mammoth species were 3 times the size of elephants.
Well, now
the petals, those remains that were in perfect condition, which tells us they did not denature, did not break down at all. So the freezing must have been almost instantaneous.
Well, if you moved me 1,000 miles north, I'd freeze pretty quick too. And I'm in Nashville. I think that, and that the woolly mammoths that were found on that island off the coast of Siberia, that was a huge find of mammoth bones there.
Right.
You wonder why were so many in such a small place, I guess is what I'm looking for.
Well, I think you have to conclude that we know that the tundra, when we have tundra today, it wasn't tundra then, it was steppe. It was a mammoth steppe. It was a temperate climate. And it was a very productive land. The amount of biomass that the land supported in these mammoth herds was enormous. So you had to have a very productive ecosystem to provide enough food for them. So it was as productive as the African savannas, that in that we have today. It was that productive, or even more productive.
Wow.
So, and we know it extended far north to the north. Much of that land is now underwater. The Siberian continental shelf is the largest continental shelf on the planet. It's enormous. So the ocean has encroached over that land today, and this explains why they found so many mammoth bones there on those islands. And I'm sure if we looked under the water there, if we looked down to the continental shelf, 50 feet or 100 feet under, you would find many, many more mammoth remains there. In fact, there was an ancient forest that would also come to light. In fact, this is one of the ways we can prove that Hapgood was correct. If an expedition went up there and looked under that Arctic Sea to the continental shelf, they would find evidence of that ancient forest. So there's no way the scientists can explain how an ancient forest could have been north of the tundra, of the present tundra, see. So that's
so
the reason,
exciting.
because the crust of the earth moved.
Yeah, but, when you stop and think about what it must have been like to be present when literally you're moved 1,000 miles in
or even more,
day,
2,000 miles, as much as 2,000 miles in a period of 24 hours. That would have been, it was cataclysmic.
Well,
yeah, it must have been cataclysmic.
Are these what would have been described as mass extinctions?
Well, it could have been a local extinction, but I don't think it. It might not have been a mass extinction. There's a lot we still don't know, and a lot of questions, about how this happened, but I do reject the theory that humans caused the extinctions of the mammoth by hunting them. They call it Pleistocene overkill. But that might have happened in England, after the crust moved and the oceans rose, and you had a population of mammoths that were trapped on England on Great Britain. There might have been humans that hunted them to extinction in that area, but humans coexisted with these mammoth herds for probably hundreds of thousands of years. Did not cause an extinction. So no, they must have been very formidable to try to hunt.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, let's
with the
figure
tools
out.
They had, the weapons they had were primitive. So
I was going to say they have spears, and that was about
right.
it. If you go back 120,000 years, probably that much more than that. I think I would have gone for vegetarianism. But I think what blows me away is that you've been able to tie in all of these spiritual sites, these Stonehenge and all of the temple sites, which then scatters them over time as opposed to gathering them all into one particular time frame. So, you get an idea as to, what must the culture have been like that created these massive, massive edifices back 100,000 years. I mean, I don't know that. I don't think they've actually dated Göbekli Tepe yet, but I'm sure it's quite far back there too. So,
I think it's about 11,000 before present, around 11,000, 12,000 in that time frame.
That's a baby.
So, yeah, people talk about Göbekli Tepe like it's that really very, very old, but given the timeline we have based on the data from the bone caves, it's not that old. The sites in Peru are much older if Carlotta's correct. So those sites would date back over 100,000 years. So that's getting back there.
Well, that makes sense. That's why I was saying I don't think South America has ever been under ice. So the groundwork there, has never been not able to be worked with. And I don't know if it was Carlotta's book or if it has to have been Carlotta's book. How he looked at the different the different ways of utilizing the stone, and makes a very good case for there are different ways of according to the centuries as to how things were built, and therefore you can see that a lot of the places that are there now have been built on top of other structures, on top of other structures, on top of other structures, which makes perfect sense to me.
Well, right, and if you go to anyone who's been to Egypt to visit the ancient sites there, you can find evidence of that in Egypt. When I was there, I got a good photo of the Temple of Dendera, the foundation. You can see it was built upon another temple underneath it.
Uh-huh.
So this must have been done again and again and again. And there are sites like, for example, the Parthenon. I bet if we could get down underneath it, you'd find that there were multiple constructions there, because that is aligned with the North Greenland pole position, which dates back to about 90 to 100,000 years ago. So that
wow.
this tells me that Greek civilization goes way back, a lot older than people think, much older than people think.
It's fascinating, and it explains a lot. I mean, when you go back into whatever records we have, there are no records as to how the pyramids were built, which suggests that our records are not as old as the pyramids themselves.
Absolutely, and the records we do have from ancient Egypt, I believe that is a legacy from an earlier civilization, the one that actually built the pyramids. I think they're older
absolutely.
than. I think that Great Pyramid was built after the last crustal displacement event, which I have not been able to date. We still don't know the date, but it was at the end of the Ice Age. The last glacial maximum, put it that way. At the end of the last glacial maximum, we don't have a date for it yet. But it must have been, one of the functions of that Great Pyramid was as a geodetic marker, in the same way that the Pyramid of the Sun at outside of Mexico City there, Teotihuacan, was also a similar geodetic marker in its day, aligned to the then current pole position in Hudson Bay. So this process has been repeated over eons of time. And we know of 5 ages of man, and they correlate with these different North Pole positions. So human history is a lot older.
And they did it with such accuracy. You wonder, did they have a compass? I mean... Well,
yeah, they must have had something better than a compass even. It had to be much better than that.
Well, yeah. And so where did it go? I mean, you're talking 100,000 years. And they were aligning their temples to true north when they're, of course, before a lot of these other changes. Just curious here, the different changes, did they move the crust about the same amount of time and space, or were there some that were moving greater distance than others?
That's a good question. The last movement from the Hudson Bay to the current pole was around 2,100 miles, so that's a long way.
Yeah.
I think some of them, I could go back and check the map. We can get a measurement on these to give you a empirical answer there, but I haven't done that. But we could. It wouldn't be that hard because this mapping software we have now, the Google Earth Pro, allows us to measure very accurately on the Earth's surface.
Well, if
so
indeed
we could do that, but I think it varied. It depended on the amount of force that hit the Earth, the amount of force that came to bear on the crust. And, we've been discussing this and what causes this and, the mechanism and so on. We still don't know the details. Carlotto thinks that he has a different hypothesis than McCanney. He thinks it was a magnetic shift of the Earth's magnetic poles. That the magnetic, let me just start over again. He thinks it was a magnetic reversal that caused it. McCanney thinks it was a near encounter with a large comet. Would have to be a planetary-sized comet. to do it. But McCanney thinks that the crust just sits upon the layer underneath, and that all it takes is a force large enough to make it slip across there. Where some people think that the layers are actually kind of locked together, and that it takes some other kind of a decoupling type process to make them decouple and then have it shift. So we don't really know, but I lean with McCanney on this.
Yeah,
and I discussed his model in the last few chapters of the book, which you read.
Yeah. No, it's just, to me, it feels like, I think the theory, it's more than a theory, it's an actuality. But, I'm curious as to, because there are some of the Indian traditions, the Native American, the indigenous peoples, their history will talk about when the stars went upside down or the earth went upside down, or it goes back in their mythology and their cosmology as well, that the sky changed. And
that's right.
I'm wondering.
There was a Greek poet named Hesiod. You probably heard of Hesiod, right?
Yeah.
Hesiod. He talked about the 5 ages of man. Somehow this knowledge was passed down to the Greeks. He picked up on it. And so that correlates with 5 different pole positions, 5 ages of man.
Well, and also the Egyptian priest that was talking to Solon and showing him how old, the pyramids were and the priesthood and everything. He basically, I don't think he gave a number of times of change, but he inferred that humans were far older on the planet than anybody knew or would ever conceive of. So it does make you wonder, were we, I don't think we came from apes. So I feel like, I think humanoids have been here for a very, very long time, but I don't think they evolved here. I think they came here as Homo sapiens. And so I'm trying to figure out, where did they go? Where is aside from the bone record and the core samples and the mollusks? Where was the Denisovans? I can't remember how far back. Thank you.
Yeah,
Denisovans.
That's not my time. That's not a subject that I don't have expertise in that area, but I've heard about people talking about it.
Yeah, they have us going back quite far, but according to these records and the temples and whatever that are theoretically attached to the Bering Sea pole, then somebody had to be here who was highly technically oriented, and
let's talk. That's right. They had to be very advanced to be able to pinpoint the pole positions and align their structures very accurately to them. They had to be very advanced. You're right. Absolutely.
Well, and then you talk about the Nazca lines. Now, the Nazca connection is something that I hadn't seen or heard of before. That fascinated me. Yes,
and this is very powerful because we have Nazca lines. Now, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the Nazca lines, but there's an area down in Peru around a place called Nazca, and that's why they named them the Nazca lines, where it's very dry, and you have these different structures. I call them structures. They're not natural. They're man-made. And some of them are just lines that go for miles on the surface of the desert there, and others are geometric figures. So there's different kinds of things there. They call them geoglyphs. But the ones that interested me because of we were discussing, I've been exploring this crustal displacement issue, are the lines, because Carlotto made a mind-boggling discovery, which he presented in his first book on this. I think it was 2020. 2 of those lines are aligned perfectly with the Bering Sea pole position the other one with the Norway Sea pole position, and those happen at different times, but they're spot on. I mean, they are spot on with those pole positions. And I was inspired by what Carlotta did, and I did some research of my own into these Nazca lines, started studying them, and you can do that with Google Earth Pro. That's one of the beauties of this software. You can zoom down onto Nazca, and you can find those lines, and you can check those alignments and see where they go. And I found that there were other Nazca lines pointing to these other pole positions, to the one at the North Greenland and the one in Hudson Bay also. So that means, and it can only mean, it must necessarily mean, that somebody was around over that entire time frame to map out those lines. That's an extremely long period of time. That's over 100,000 years. So that tells us there was a high civilization present on this planet doing this work, this scientific work, and leaving a record right there on the surface of the Earth at Nazca of these pole positions.
Well, and they cut off the top of a mountain in order to do it too. I mean, it wasn't all level that way originally. It was terraformed. So it does make one wonder where'd they go? Where's the records? I mean, it saddens me greatly that although 120,000 years is a long time to keep a record, but it's usually in stone if it's kept at all, and unfortunately a lot of the records are there. We just don't know how to read them.
We're talking about a civilization that was very advanced and that preceded the Incas by thousands of years. I mean, the Incas did not build Machu Picchu. These structures were there long before them. They never claimed, in fact, that they built them. And one of I went down to the Peru. I was very fortunate to make a trip down there. In fact, I was fortunate to do 3 trips in 2018 and 2019, one to Peru and Bolivia, one to Mexico, and another one to Egypt. And I was very fortunate to make those trips before the pandemic shut everything down.
Yeah.
But the first thing you notice in Peru, if you haven't been there, if you've been there, when you're in that sacred valley, the first thing you notice are these this irrigation system of steps that steps up the side of the mountains. I'm having a senior moment here there's a name for what they call them, but they were growing food there for a much larger population at one time that currently lives there. They cannot use this step system to grow food now because it goes up so high. It reaches all the way up. There's a high peak there in Bolivia. These steps go up all the way up above the snow line. So you can't grow corn there now, but at one time you could. And at one time they were growing crops for a much larger population. And if you go there now, you'll see that in the around Lake Titicaca and that Great Valley, they grow food down on the bottomlands along the valley floors. They don't use those that irrigated step agricultural formation to grow food anymore. And this means that the entire Andes lifted up by several thousand feet, probably in one event.
Isn't that too the same thing with Angkor Wat? That there were huge villages and towns around it that had irrigation and everything that was there, and the jungle took it over because, of course, there was a shift. But that's India.
What I'm talking about are the agricultural terraces. That's what that's the word the terracing. Now, I've never been to Angkor Wat, and I believe it's a low elevation, not very high up, and I think that dates to the, I think it's fairly recent, but I'm not an expert on that, haven't been there and so on, so I don't really want to get into it too deep.
No, gotcha. No, I can't tell you what the date is on it either. I know it's old, but so now I'm going to have to make myself a chart, and I'm probably going to go to Mark's book for it or yours. And I think when I spoke with him last, I said I would like to have overlays of the different time frames that you could slap down and show these were here during the Bering Sea pole shift, and then on top of that, the North Greenland, and so that you could see that they all weren't done at the same time. There were probably thousands of years difference. That's
right. And so it's important. I think it's important for people to understand that these advanced civilizations have been around and have coexisted with simpler cultures, Aboriginal cultures and more primitive cultures side by side. And this has been going on for over 100,000 years.
And more. I think, there's got to be even more. And, my fascination now is shifted to what happened before the Ice Age. What was the civilization like then, and what has come forward in time. And, if something happened today and there was a shift of over 1,000 miles, and the only thing I can think of that would survive for 1,000 years is Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Rushmore would survive. That would survive. The pyramids would survive. They'd be pointed, and they'd be aligned to they would not be aligned to the current new pole, though.
No, but I don't think Rushmore's aligned to anything either. But when you stop and think about it, the only thing that would survive would be Mount Rushmore, and 100,000 years from now. I mean, imagine what they would think. Were they gods? It's sort of like you can't. You don't know how to leave a message that no, these were just famous men of our time, and they're just. You kind of want to preserve history, and that's why I think the ice cores were so fascinating, because they really do tell you about thousands of years. I mean, I forget how far back an ice core could go, but they had one that was almost a mile long.
Well, there's different ones. There's this is something that Carlotta's looking at. He's looking at the Antarctica, and there are two cores down there that are the longest ones on the planet. There's one at Vostok, that's the Russian base, and there's a lake there way deep under the ice too. But they have drilled cores there, and it's 3,600 feet down to the bottom, to solid bedrock. And the other core is at the place called what's the name of it? Sea Dome. Dome C, that's the name of it. It's also in a similar, it's not too far from Vostok, and it's about 3,300 meters down. So it's not quite as deep. I don't think they've got the dating worked out yet, because the longer core at Vostok supposedly only goes back 400,000 years, whereas the one at Dome C, which is shorter, only 3,300 meters, goes back 800,000 years, twice as far back. So I think they're still trying to work out to get the dating down. They're still working on that, but they're very, very deep and very old.
Are they able to determine when the South Pole was free of ice from a core sample?
Well, this is the thing. You mean the current South Pole?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. It's very interesting. We talked about this last week. I sit in on a chat group with Carlotto, and he's really good using the maps, generating these maps, to help us visualize what we're talking about. And if you look at Antarctica, the continent of Antarctica, what he did was he superimposed on that map the Arctic Circle for each one of the 5 pole positions. And there's a common polygon, that is present for all of them, all 5. It just so happens that is the oldest ice in Antarctica, and I believe that's where I haven't been able to confirm this, but I'm pretty sure that's where these 2 deep ice cores that I was just mentioning were drilled, and that's the oldest ice. So that is the area that has been under ice the longest time. So it makes sense, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, if you do the same thing for the Arctic, and you superimpose the Arctic Circle for each one of the 5 pole positions, it turns out that the common area in all of them is, guess what? It's Greenland. It's the main body of Greenland falls in that common area. So that explains why why Greenland was covered with ice. And it's interesting that Hapgood actually suggested this in his first book, but he did not know about all 5 of the pole positions. He knew about the one in Hudson Bay, and he knew the current pole, and he knew about one over in the Norway Sea, although his position was a little different than Carlotta's. But he had the general idea right, and so he had Greenland in the middle with North Pole positions on 3 sides. So he correctly drew the conclusion that explains why there's an ice cap there.
Wow.
Pretty cool, huh? It's pretty cool.
Yes, it's very cool.
And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
It does, and yet, first of all, there's no way of arguing with any of this because it's right there in front of you. What is the reluctance of academia to confirm it and start to teach it? Because it seems
the answer is the same. Look, the answer is the same reluctance that Darwin had back in the 1840s or 1850s. It's just the assumptions that they're working with. They're limited by their own belief system and their inability to examine their assumptions, to take a second look at their assumptions, because the assumptions are incorrect.
But these academia, these people are supposedly intelligent. Why would you preserve something that's antiquated and not true?
Well, because scientists are just human like everybody else, and they are limited by their own beliefs. If a belief system is limiting you, then you're going to be limited in what you can think. You won't be able to think outside the box. So that's the problem, in a nutshell.
Well, I think also there's the publish or perish thing, and God forbid they're wrong, then they lose their credentials. So.
And a lot of these scientists, they stare at a computer screen all day long, and they think they're looking at reality. They're looking at a model. And these models are incorrect, okay? These computer models about climate, for example, they are all incorrect because climate is so complicated, we haven't been able to figure out how to model it accurately so far. So, we just have to keep improving the model, but this doesn't always happen.
Well, true. But, they're trying to manipulate the weather, too, and that's going to be, another disaster if they go too far with it. I think the Earth does just fine all by itself, and they should leave it alone. But that's just me.
Right. They're causing a lot of problems with this geoengineering that people don't even know it's happening. That they've done this without telling us. It's been kind of in the black realm.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when I hate to say it, little boys get too powerful. They're little girls too. It's not just boys. But you look at all of this material and you think, Now, where is it that we have that seed bank? That's in the is it in the Arctic that there's that seed bank?
Yeah, it's up at Spitsbergen.
Yeah. I've been there.
Really?
Yes, I had. I was married to a sea captain once, and our honeymoon had to be someplace he'd never been, which made it an unusual honeymoon.
I'll say. So you had to take some pretty warm clothes, huh?
Yeah. Oh God, it was cold, and I've crossed the Arctic Circle actually.
Cool. That's very cool.
It was cold. It was not cool. Yeah, no, it was.
Well, I've been in Alaska before. I was my father was in the Air Force, so we were in Anchorage and at the air base there, and so I've seen, the late night sun and the darkness during the winter. I'm familiar with that.
I think that and the Northern Lights are so magnificent. It's unbelievable. But it just I think there's so much about the planet that is just magical, and people don't seem to be looking into what we have here. They're looking into taking us away from the natural part of our lives, which is very sad. But I think that what you've got here is just such an amazing presentation. I'd love to see some schools. I would love to see some schools that were brave enough.
Yeah, I agree. It should be a textbook for natural history.
Yeah. I mean, you can link the time frames so accurately with the bones and the mollusks and the lines. I can't see how anybody could argue with it and say, oh no, this is just an assumption and you're crazy. Well, they could do it, but it wouldn't make any sense to me. And I found that when you were talking about the caves in Britain where all of the bones were intermingled, I mean they were identifying the time frames so well by the species of animals that were on each level that couldn't possibly have been in other levels if the ecology was the same as it was today. So that they were, and it seems to me that rhinoceroses and hippopotamuses seem to hippopotamuses especially because they don't travel. They are not a migrating animal at all.
That's right. That's right. So when they first made this discovery, they did not understand the stratification approach that's used in paleontology. Identifying the different strata, and they got mixed up, and they thought they found the hippo bones, and they also found the bones of things like brown bears, black bears, and northern species, and they couldn't understand why the two were together, and they thought maybe they were migrating, that the species were migrating, but that theory didn't hold up.
No.
There was no migration. You can't, because hippos don't migrate for one reason.
No. But they are definitely more indigenous, a lot further south. So that would, when you stop and think, and people should get Google Earth and try tipping it so that you can see the difference it makes in all the countries as to the kind of climate they would possibly have. And each of these stages, each of these time frames were 40, 50, 60, 100,000 years. So, it was, the pole was where it was for a very long period of time, enough so that the flora and the fauna of the particular areas could grow up and be, forests and whatever, as opposed to what they are today. And certainly even the Gobi Desert used to be a very lush environment.
Well, let me just run through the different climates that England had, since we're talking about this, we have 5 different pole positions, 5 different stratigraphic layers. The oldest was when the pole was in the Bering Sea, the North Pole in the Bering Sea, meant that England was down at the in the subtropics. And then the next age of that happened with the pole, there was a pole shift, and England enjoyed a temperate climate. And during this period of time, you had falling sea levels, and you actually had mammoths living in England. There was a land bridge there between England and Europe, so you had mammoths in England, and this went on for quite a long time. Then there was another pole shift, and I should have mentioned that pole, when England had the temperate climate, the North Pole was in North Greenland at that time. And then you had another pole shift, and England was under a frigid ice age conditions, and the pole at that time was in the Norway Sea. And we have the mollusks from that period reflect the fact that you had very northerly species like the Arctic fox and so on. And then you had the next period was a temperate climate, and the North Pole at that time in that period was in the Hudson Bay. And once again you had and during the and I should have mentioned that when the Europe was having the ice age, you had high sea levels at that time. So England was actually isolated from the continent of Europe. And then in the next period, again, another temperate period, and you had, again, falling seas, and you had mammoths again in England. And during this latest temperate period, which correlates with the ice cap over North America, you had a mammoth steppe that extended from England all the way across Scandinavia, all the way across Central Asia, and all the way to China. And you had this in Siberia, this enormous steppe habitat ecosystem, and you had this amazing megafauna bestiary, that included the different kinds of mammoths, and you had the great bison that were, much larger than the bison that inhabits North America today. But it's the same species, evidently, same species, and other species that have gone extinct. So it was just an enormous ecosystem, incredible. Must have been incredible, really.
I know that there was one period of time where there was an ice. The ice went as far as Columbus, Ohio, in the United States.
Right.
I'm not sure.
Well, I think you're talking about the penultimate ice age, which occurred 150,000 years ago, when you had ice extending all the way down into the Missouri region.
Wow.
The last ice cap during the last glacial maximum, you had ice all the way down to Indianapolis and Des Moines, Iowa. Those were the two easily visual, places people can relate to, which gives them an idea about how far south it went.
Do we have mastodons and stuff like that in this country? Because I don't think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But they were down, and you had them down in New Mexico and Arizona, and all the way down into Mexico City and in central Mexico.
Wow.
And Alaska too. At that point, was ice free. There were parts of Alaska that were ice free. And Siberia was mostly ice-free, almost entirely ice-free at that point. So in fact, I said China. I said it came from England all the way across Asia to China, but it also extended into parts of Alaska, across the Bering. There was a land bridge across the Bering Sea then.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
right.
there have been times when. And again, this is not taught in school. And as an ex-school teacher, I just, it kills me that so much fascinating stuff is now becoming available that could make learning so much more enjoyable for kids, and they're not including it in their in their lesson plans and stuff like that. It's just, to me, this is fascinating. This would make it more interesting for kids to grab on to the earth that we live on and the things that can happen, and that there is a crust that we rest on that can, under the right circumstances, shift us 1,000 to 2,000 miles in another direction. Now that's
and some of these kids, these kids are very smart. They could pick up on this quickly. If they had a Google Earth Pro mapping software on their school computer, they could just start working with this right now.
I think the other thing that was interesting was that at one time there are a series of at least 7 active volcanoes around Antarctica that have been activated or have always been active. I'm not sure which, that is helping the ice to melt.
Apparently, it's warm enough underneath that there actually is a little bit of melting going on down underneath, because there is heat down there from the volcanic magma down there.
Yeah. No, there's so much that's so cool that's going on. I mean, and look at the illusion.
I'd love to visit down there. I'd love to make a trip down there.
Yeah. It's cold. How about the illusions? They've got strings of volcanoes there, and the planet takes care of itself if you leave it alone. But I don't think, I don't know why people can't leave it alone, but they can't. But all of this is so illuminating, and I kind of, the Indians have talked about the sky wobbling, or the stars wobbling. So it feels like something has gone on. Have we recently had some sort of something screw with our magnetism or something that went by us? Because it feels to me as though there is definitely a shift in the energy of the planet. And I haven't heard of any close encounters with comets or anything like that lately, and yet it seems like there has been a change of some sort.
They say the Earth's magnetic field is diminishing in strength, and some people think that we're headed for that we're due for one of these reversal events in the next 20, 30 years. So that's possible. I mean, I don't have any information that says it can't happen or won't happen. So yeah, it's possible. I didn't really look at the geomagnetic reversal issue as I was focusing more on the crustal issue.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah, I can understand why. But the poles have shifted over time. You
mean the magnetic pole?
Yes.
Right. Yes. Absolutely.
I'm wondering if that figures into any of this as well. But certainly
it must. Yeah, I mean it must somehow. I don't understand it though. We're still, there's still a lot of things we got more questions than answers at this point.
Well, yeah. But you've got a lot of answers now that you didn't have about 20 years ago, for sure.
I have to tell you, this book was a lot of fun to write. It was just a lot of fun to do this. I love it. I mean, it's just so exciting, the material. So I love talking about it.
Well, it is fascinating. So, is it just the outer crust, that moves, or are there other levels that move as well? Do you think?
Well, that's a good question. Again, we don't know. We don't really know yet, but the evidence indicates to me that the there is a layer where the slippage occurs. I think it's fairly deep down because we have, if you look at the, for example, I'll give you an example, the Hawaiian Islands, and those islands have been around for a very long time, and the island chain actually extends for a long distance out to the northwest. I think Midway Island is even part of that chain. I'd have to double check the map again. But so you had the crust move, and yet you still have this line of islands forming from volcanic events. So that tells you that the slippage occurs at a deeper level than that. So it must be pretty deep.
Yeah,
That's
I was
my
going to
thinking.
say, how deep are you thinking? A mile, 2 miles, something like that?
No, it would be deeper than a mile, but I don't know how deep. I think the outer lithosphere is around 20, either 20 miles or 20 kilometers. So it would be deeper than that, but I don't know by how much.
I was wondering because of all the drilling and stuff that's been going on, if there were a shift, would it affect that drilling? And probably not.
Probably not. I don't think they're going down that deep enough to have any effect on this type of activity.
Would be interesting. I mean, now you want us to hang around and just see the next shift, and of course that could be, a long time. As far as people saying, oh, there's change coming, and 17,000 years was one estimate that somebody threw out there, that it would be 17,000 years before there was another mass extinction or something like that. But this comes close to a mass extinction. It does explain why places like Derinkuyu and other places that have tunnels underground are around. It doesn't, of course, they didn't leave any explanation as to why they did them, but it makes perfect sense. If suddenly there was some sort of activity like this, the people had to go somewhere to protect themselves. But it's amazing information, and it makes perfect sense that we are a lot older than we've been told. And you use the Bible, and it only goes back 6,000 years, I think. That nothing happened before then, and then in 6,000 years everything happened, which makes it not a great history book right at the moment. But it does open
a very
up.
difficult. The Bible is I believe it is a very difficult book to properly interpret, because there are elements of history and there is sacred writing, scriptural, spiritual material, and then there is a lot of other cultural, political stuff even in there. So it makes it difficult to interpret. But I think I can't help but believe that we're going to come across a hall of records that Edgar Casey talked about at some point. I think there's got to be a buried hall of records somewhere, and that's going to be mind-boggling when we find it. But things are changing fast right now. I think people are waking up.
Not a good time to be an archaeologist with so much coming to light, where everything is now put in question, and with proof showing that there's greater antiquity here. I mean, look at all of the out-of-place objects that have been found with small computers that predate the Greeks. So, there have been intelligent beings on this planet that are no longer here, but and that's the other thing. Where'd they go? I mean, these crust slippages.
This is the question that keeps nagging at me and all of the people who are doing this, research. What happened to them? And the answer that I come up with is the answer that that woman, what was her name? Seti, a woman who lived at Abydos. Do you know the story about Seti?
Is this the one that could walk around and read the hieroglyphs and tell the story of everything?
Well, just before she died, she authored a book about the temple of Seti I and Abydos, and there's a commentary on, I believe, every single mural in that entire temple in her book. That's what the book's about. So she was the world expert on that temple by the time she died in 1983 or 82. And she believed that, and she states this in her book, that when they went to expand that temple in 1200 BC or 1300 BC, when Seti, the pharaoh, decided to expand the temple, and they had rules for doing this. And according to the rules of temple construction, they would have extended it out to the west end. When they did that, when they started to do that, they discovered this other thing down at 40 feet down under the sand that we now call the Osirion, which I believe is one of the most incredible sites on the planet. And who knows how old it is, with these megalithic slabs and this. To me, it's just utterly mind-boggling, and it's got to be in the top 10 sites on the planet. I put it right up there, the second or third, after Giza and the Great Pyramid. But they didn't even know it was there, according to Seti. She didn't think she believed that they rediscovered it in 1300 BC. And it had been much, much older, and it was a high civilization. They were able to move these gigantic megalithic slabs, 300, 500-ton blocks, which Seti I couldn't do. So, the civilization in 1300 BC was not near as advanced.
Well, I think Carlotta's recent book, what is it, Beyond Atlantis?
Yes, very amazing book.
Yeah, Did
you send you a copy?
No, I buy the books. I buy all the books because authors got to eat. So
right.
I buy the books, and I found that just the fact that. I mean, you can't even call them ancient because they're beyond ancient, whatever that is. And they're just hidden in the mists of time. And they're so fascinating because they had to be so highly advanced. They had to be able to, every site out there has an observatory so that they were watching the stars. And they were connected to astronomy, and they were able to predict eclipses, and they were able to predict so much else that their knowledge was amazing. Oh, you talked about the Great Pyramid, but not about Stonehenge and the purpose of Stonehenge.
Yes. Okay. Well, I do present a hypothesis for what that was, and I have to give some credit to the scientist Jim McCanney. He helped with this. He believed that, in fact, he has a pamphlet out, and I mentioned this in my book, that people can use if we ever get in a situation where we have a crustal displacement. You're going to need to calibrate the calendar. You're going to have to figure out where you are, so you're going to need to know when to plant seeds so that you can grow food. Otherwise, you may starve to death. And he thinks this is what Stonehenge was originally, and I think he might be right. Probably originally had wooden piers, not stone. The stone came much later. Probably they were using a circle with these wooden henges to, determine the solstices, and then if you figure out the solstice, which is a lot easier, you can easily figure, if you know the solstice, you just divide that angle in two and you figure out the equinox. And that would give you, tell you the start of spring.
Well,
so
yeah,
you know when to
but,
plant. You got to know when to plant your seeds.
Well, and depending on where you are, I think that's the one thing that farmers. I'm in Nashville, and I'm in the middle of farm country, and they're having trouble figuring out when to plant their crops because the seasons have changed so radically. So, we're having that problem now, and I think it's something that is. I think you're right. I agree with you on the purpose of Stonehenge. It was more of a calendar than anything else. I mean, there are opinions on everything from a healing center to a graveyard to, you name it. They've designated it, and there's no way to prove exactly what it was, but that would make sense because the heel stone and everything should align, and that would give you a planting season. But it would depend on what the weather was like wherever you are. I mean, if there's a 2,000-mile shift, that's going to change a lot. And
that's right. It depends
too.
on where you're located. Everything depends on where you are in relation to the maximum movement, of the crust. So if you're, for example, we know archaeologists have found evidence of that humans were living in Siberia 40,000 years ago. There were cultures up there. It was developed. There were human societies up there. But I don't think they survived the last crustal displacement because the line of maximum force, what we call Hapgood called the meridian of maximum displacement, came right down through there. So they suffered the full, 2,000-mile movement, and they went from where temperate to frigid in one day. They probably didn't make it. That would have been hard to survive that.
I would think not. I mean, knowing if you're moving that fast, no building would survive, and I wouldn't think any person would survive either.
Well,
we
even
don't
if they
have
were
structure.
say they were hunters and gatherers, living in teepees or some kind of tent-like structures, or maybe primitive housing. They wouldn't have been able to make it probably because it would have been the drastic climatic shift would have been immediate.
Yeah, that's what we've also had though some pretty hefty comet strikes. I mean, the one in the Yucatan was huge, and that created tsunamis and stuff like that. So those kind of things do happen as well. It's funny. We look at the moon, and there are pockmarks all over it because it's been hit by comets and stuff, and you don't see the same thing with Earth, but it happens on Earth as well. It's just that we don't see the actual marks because they're either underwater or by water or in places where people actually don't see them. But when you stop and think about
you have a lot of weathering, the marks that they leave, these events leave, get weathered away eventually, so they disappear.
Oh yeah, and I mean, look at King Tut's, his favorite knife that was buried with him was a comet. It was, a comet that had been worked into a knife. So they have, we've known about comets for thousands of years, and comets have been used as sacred stones and things like that. But they have hit the planet pretty hard a number of times. So
yeah, I'm sure that's true. I talk about that in the book.
Yeah, but you do begin to wonder, what is the how big an electromagnetic pulse or whatever, a planet-sized comet goes by, wouldn't that pull us off our axis or out of our rotation around the sun?
Yes, you could have other effects too, like that. You could change the angle, of the that the axis of the Earth could shift, could change. The angle can change, and if that happened, you would have changes to the seasons. You could have either it would affect the seasons, or you could have the Earth could slow down, which would affect the length of the day. So, or the orbit could be moved, and that would change the rotation around the sun. That would change the length of the year. So these things can also happen. Just depends on it just depends on how large that comet is, how large and how close it comes.
But if it changed our orbit, wouldn't that take us out of orbit around the sun?
Well, I'm sure our orbit has been changed a number of times. Some people think that we are just barely within the habitable zone at this point. So I wouldn't be surprised if there has been change to that more than once.
Well, and they're saying also that the moon is moving away from the Earth at a slow pace, but it is moving away from the Earth, and if it does go out of orbit, what does that do to our seas and everything like that? Because it does affect our highs and low tides and things like that. Do we need the moon, I wonder?
I think we really need it. Yeah, I think we do need it, and some people think that it's not natural, that it was put there by somebody.
Well, it rang when we dropped a space probe on it.
So you probably had this conversation before with somebody, huh?
Well, with the moon? Well, yeah, a lot of people have different opinions, and I can't dispute any of them. They all sound fascinating, but it does feel as though originally I was taught that it was a part of Earth that had broken away. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I tend to discount those kind of ideas.
But then
I learned a lot from McCanny. We learned a lot from McCanny about this sort of thing.
Yeah.
He thinks that most of the planets around the sun were captured.
Okay.
That they were comets that came through and got captured, and that this explains why originally there were just two. Probably most star systems are involve two stars.
Yeah.
And the Earth, our solar system would have been the Sun and Jupiter. Jupiter is large enough; it has star-like qualities. So that would have been the other one.
Well,
and I think
there are.
Right. I think it's probably right.
Well, I think it all could be right, and I know that there was a time long ago that there were two suns, and the other sun was, I think, Saturn, and then it moved out of its orbit with us, and then moved to wherever it went to. But and that makes sense too. I mean, there are cultures that remember the time of the two suns, which I think is really cool too. I think what's so amazing is that history, real history, is so much better than fiction that it would be more exciting to teach it if people would pay attention. Because what you've got here is just phenomenal stuff, and it makes sense. I if I wanted to, I couldn't punch a hole in any of it. So
that makes me feel good. I'm glad that that I convinced you. No one has been able to punch any holes in it, I can tell you that, and I'm waiting for the science community to actually respond. They basically just dodged the whole question. They've ignored it. They regard it as pseudoscience. But I just laugh at that. I have not tried to go head to toe-to-toe with anybody in the science community, but I'm perfectly willing to do it, any time. If they want to talk, I'm ready.
Well, how can you argue with the proof that you've got? Even Darwin had the proof. He just didn't know what to do with it. So
yeah, right. That's right.
And that to me is fascinating. That again, the time frame he probably couldn't take that extra step because of his reputation, and I guess I understand that. But it does feel as though there's nothing here that could, if somebody endorsed it, that they would lose their reputation if something came up, because you've got so many different areas that you can validate what you've got going here. The one that is the least credible would be the orientation of the different temples at different places, but
you mean the archaeological data?
Yeah.
Yeah, some scientists consider that to be soft, not hard, not empirical, more soft evidence. But I think it's pretty good. The fact that they line up so perfectly, that's powerful to me.
But when you look at the animal bones and the shells, the mollusk shells, there's no debating that. They can all be tested any way you want to. You're going to come up with the same dates. Radiocarbon dating is pretty good these days. So it's sort of like, yeah. So what's your next book?
I'm still. I haven't. I can't talk about that. I'm still, cogitating on that. It's still in a place that's I don't have words to talk about it yet. So just leave that alone.
Okay. Because, I think, given material like this, I have to clump forward and challenge someone.
Well, let me just, you might, if you liked this book, you might like my book about the early Christianity. I noticed that you do spiritual things, interviews, that sort of thing. But I did a book in 2004 about early Christianity, the Gnostics, based on an original source text. So that might be something that you would find interesting.
I will definitely take a look at it.
You can find it up on Amazon.
Oh yeah, everything's on Amazon. But I think this show has, one of the very exciting parts about the show is, wherever my interest takes me, I put it out there, and happily there's an audience for it. And it's sort of like, it's my way of learning, it's my way of growing. And if I take a couple thousand people with me, that's fine with me. Do you have any idea,
Barbara? Do you have any idea how large your audience is?
Well, I had a client who was in Kuala Lumpur a while back, and he was talking to a Tibetan monk, and he said to the monk that he knew somebody that painted mandalas and had created a deck of cards from the mandalas. And the priest looked at him and said, "You mean Barbara DeLong?" It's a pretty big audience.
Oh, that's good. Great. Glad to hear that.
There's I don't know how, there's no way to really tell, because even though we have a lot of different servers, I have no way of grabbing numbers from most of them. My website gets thousands of hits, so something's going on. But as far as, I would like to I know for a fact that the show is listened to around the world, because one of the places that I can get numbers from, can tell me even the city that the listener came from. So, and that's huge numbers. But can I say I have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million listeners? I don't know, but I know there are a lot of them, and it's kind of fun to watch, different areas of the country come up and suddenly have a flurry of people listening from. I know there are a bunch of people in Australia. There are a bunch of people in China and Russia, even the Ukraine. I'm surprised that any computer is working there these days, but it's all over the world. I've gotten responses and stuff from. So it's well listened to. The YouTube channel has almost 2,200 subscribers, which is not bad. Blog Talk, we've passed 500,000 as far as listens. So
nice.
Hard to say.
Yeah,
they're
nice.
big numbers. And it's I get lots of comments from people all over the world, and it's nice to know that people appreciate the fact that first of all, there are no commercials aside from "This is a good book, please read it," and I basically help to present whatever author is on the show in their best light, because my job is to make you look really, really good. And
okay.
So
well, I appreciate that, but I certainly don't. Don't mind if somebody challenges me on something, because that's part of the process,
Oh, well, that's a lot of fun.
It is.
But I think that it's a good platform to put all sorts of wonderful new theories and ideas. And my gosh, yours isn't a theory; it's actuality. You can't argue with this. It isn't one little test or a thought that you've run away with or anything like that. You've got concrete evidence here. I bet even Darwin would agree with you.
Well, I wish I had a chance to talk to him. I wish I had that opportunity. I'd love to talk to Darwin.
Or Einstein. That would be fun too.
Well, Einstein or Hapgood too, for that matter.
Yeah, aren't they dead?
Yeah, they're all gone. Long gone.
Well,
Hopefully
I happen to be a
place.
medium. No, I happen to be a medium. Someday we'll have to try to connect with them.
Okay.
That would be fun. Probably. Not sure what we'd get, but it would be fun anyhow. But you're carving a place in history for yourself, and and I think this book is certainly a wonderful example of here it is. Prove me wrong, and I don't see how anybody could. So
I give for the listeners. I want them to know. I actually propose several proofs in the book. Things that could be scientific expeditions that could be mounted to confirm Hapgood's ideas. There's several different ideas presented in the book.
Well, the only person I know that has contact with underwater stuff is Charlie Pellegrino. And he was in the submersible that discovered and did all of the work on the Titanic.
Oh, really? He worked on the movie?
He did.
Oh,
yeah,
no,
he worked on the movie with James
he worked
Cameron.
On the movie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I can put you in touch with Charlie.
Well, that's interesting. I'm prepared to talk to anybody, so.
Well, Charlie is.
I don't know if he's into science. Is he into scientific research, or is he just into finding old wrecks?
Oh no, he's into archaeology. He and James Cameron did excavated the tomb of Jesus, the family tomb of Jesus, not too long ago.
And he has all the equipment. He has the ships and everything, huh?
Well, he has access to them. Yeah, I don't think they're his ships, and he did do a lot of dives on the Titanic. He's written a lot of really good books. He's written a lot on the Titanic. We had an anniversary of the Titanic sinking, I think, last year, and Charlie had written 4 books, and I read all 4 of them, and I had nightmares because all I could see was sinking ships, and I told him I'm not doing that again, because I always read the books before I do an interview.
Yeah,
but
that was
he's written some
scary story.
It was, and I became so involved with the different characters that were real people that I lost my focus. But he's written fiction book. He wrote a book called Dust, and the premise of it was that all of the insects died, and what happened to the planet if all of the insects died. And he wrote it quite a while ago, and then suddenly I remembered, wait a minute, the bees are dying. There are a lot of the insects that are going, extinct, and his book was frightening. He writes well. He's also done investigations of the Holocaust. He did interviews with people that had survived both Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and that's one of the best books I've ever read. So I can put you in touch with him. He might, you might be able to put it out for him, and he might be able to do something with you as far as checking out that shelf.
Yeah, fine. I'll try anything. So yes, but go ahead.
Now,
feel free.
I will do that. Now, where was it that you found the stumps that were fossilized?
Oh, I think you're talking about Siberia. I'm not. Yeah. I don't think they were fossilized. I think they were just remnants. The ancient forest, the remnants of the ancient forest, still there. That, and you get something like that under salt water. It might not take a long time to break down. I mean, even 10,000 years, you might have leftover evidence, that could persist, because the water is very, very cold. So the cold water would inhibit the deterioration. It
would be fascinating to see what was on that shelf. Whether there might even be some sort of ruins of cities or whatever too. Because if
hard
that's
to say.
where
I mean, we don't. It's possible. I'm not going to rule it out. That they're finding. It's very common for fishermen to come up with their nets and their fishing lines to pull in mollusk bones and tusks and things from Doggerland. That bank. It's like a shallow sea there between England and Europe, and they call it Doggerland. And that was formerly land at one point, and there are a lot of bones and things still down there on that seafloor.
Wow. That's interesting. I think I have somebody. Oh, yeah. Graham Phillips in July. He's written a book called The Mystery of Doggerland. And
cool. Well, you can ask him about that. I'm sure he would be.
I will.
Have lots of things to say about that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. Yeah, I have met so many amazing people through this show that it's a wonderful adventure.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah, it's. I mean, when I start to see names I recognize in other people's books, I sit back and chuckle. Yeah, but you do this for 14 years, and it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of authors. So
yeah. You do this every once a week?
One a week, yes, without fail. And I'm so glad the pandemic is over, because during the pandemic, every author decided that, they could either, write the one book of 300 pages or extend it to 500 pages, and a lot of people went to 500 and 600 pages, which is a challenge. I think we're back now, so people are writing 300-page books, which are easy to get through in a week. But
yeah, right.
Not 500 and 800. There was one 800-page book that I got that I was so sick of flints at the end of 800 pages. I never wanted to see that word again.
What was the word?
Flints. How they chipped the flint, the arrowheads and everything. Yeah, not.
Okay.
It was not my favorite topic. So if people want to get a hold of you, where do they do that? And is there a website?
Let's see. The best way, I think, would be to just let me give you my email, and you can announce it or put it up on your webpage.
Yeah.
Or just you actually have my email, so you can just get it from my the correspondence we have had. Or you're welcome to announce that over the air also. It's Mark H Gaffney, all one word, at earthlink.net. And my name, Gaffney, is Gaffney.
Well, we're gonna have to do this again, because I think that there's probably material that we haven't gotten into that I would like to get into. And I can't think of what it might be, but it just, the moving of the crust fascinates me, and it opens up so much, to the imagination as far as what it would be like if suddenly the Earth spins 2,000 miles in another direction.
Well, this is definitely one of the ways to one of the doorways to understand the human history, and prehistory, the pre-recorded history.
Yeah, and the fact that pre-recorded history doesn't mean that it's antiquated. It appears that it was they were civilizations that were, technically speaking, far and above what we have here today, because today we could not create the pyramids.
Correct. Yeah, we don't have the ability to do it.
No, and I think sound has to come in here somehow. I know that I keep going back to the guy in Florida who did the Coral Castle, and he moved all of the stones all by himself, and nobody ever saw him do it. And
right.
He used no tools really or anything. So it sits you back and it says, okay. And of course then he died and he took the secret with him, because he said he had the secret.
Yeah, I wonder why nobody actually, maybe he didn't want to share it with anybody. I don't know. That's a good question.
Well, it does make you wonder, because, he built it for a woman that never came to marry him. And he lived very frugally, and it just, I don't know. I just can't imagine somebody having that kind of information and not sharing it in some way, shape, or form, and giving people a leg up on just how was it done. I think it has something to do with sound. Not positive, but I think it has something to do with sound and wavelengths, because they can levitate things with sound. So why not, stones?
Yeah.
Stones.
Why not, indeed?
Well, we'll see. Well, I want to thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure, and you've been incredibly informative, but I want more. So.
Well, thank you. It was fun too. I enjoyed it.
Well, I'll be in touch with you, and we'll get you in here on the Christianity book for sure. And I'll see if I can get a hold of Charlie Pellegrino and give you an introduction to him.
Sounds good. Thank you, Barbara.
If you get to go underwater to look at something, say hello to my ancestor.
Okay, he's up there somewhere.
He is.
Oh, didn't they bring the body back? I think they brought the body back. If I remember reading about it in Wikipedia, I don't know if they got their facts right. But
yeah, they brought the body back, and he is buried it may be at Annapolis, or he's at Arlington, that's in New York. But he's definitely, what's left of him. He was buried at the mouth of the Lena River originally, and then they sent ships and they brought him back home.
Yeah, well, he's a hero.
Yeah, one nobody knows about, but he is a hero. Someday I may do a show just on him, just for the heck of it. But until that time, I thank you so much. I will definitely get this up and out there by tomorrow, and I'll send you the link to it on YouTube. And we'll take this information and do something with it, and then we'll get you back here with your other book.
Sounds good, Barbara. Thank you.
Absolutely. Take care now, and good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Tune in again. We will be back next week with another fascinating book and author. But check this book out, because it really is worth reading, and it's an enjoyable read. You're going to learn a lot. Good night now.